welcome here after our break. If you're joining us online, welcome also to y'all. Let's go ahead and stand up together. We're going to sing some songs together. We got Ann and Mickey, the dynamic duo. You got any jokes for us tonight?
No, I'm just, I'm trying to control myself.
Trying to control yourself, all right.
There's so many things happening I could joke about, but I don't want to. So we decided we'd do a slow one about where we go to pray and have peace, which is in the garden. Could be a real garden. Could be in your closet. Could be beside your bed. Could be where you work. It's still in the garden. I come to the garden alone while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. Sound of his voice is so sweet, the birds hush their singing, and the melody that he gave to me within my heart is ringing, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. I'd stay in the garden night around me be falling, but he bids me go through the voice of woe. His voice to me is calling, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. We all sound pretty good on that one. We thought we'd try to pick it up a little bit just in case anybody was yawning. I didn't see anybody, but just in case. Yeah, you can clap your hands or stomp your feet or
just have a good time with this song.
What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. day to day, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarm. Leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. What have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. I have blessed peace with my Lord so near. Leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarm. Leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. Amen.
Hey.
Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, ladies. Open your Bibles with me tonight to Exodus chapter 33. Exodus chapter 33. I want you to know you came on a great night. Hi, Earl. Good to see you. I'm eager to get back in the pulpit. I've been gone for several weeks. COVID is a lot of fun in the beginning. You know, everybody, you can tell everybody, I've got COVID. And then that lasts about 20 minutes. And then it's not fun anymore, just like the flu or anything else. And so the staff and I are eager to get back into the routine of things now that we have antibodies. I love the antibodies. That means I can hug people and shake hands and not have to worry about giving or receiving the coronavirus. So that's good. Exodus chapter 33, we're going to begin in verse 1. Before I read this, I want to catch you up a little bit. If you're watching online, to update you as well. This is an exciting moment in the history of Israel and in the history of mankind. Certainly a great moment in the history of the Bible. It is a transitional time, which is great for us because we find ourselves historically in a transitional time as well. The Israelites have spent 400 plus years in captivity in Egypt. God has heard their cries, has taken mercy on them, and a desire to fulfill his promise ultimately to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he would make many nations from them and bless them and bring them into the promised land. God has decided to deliver his people who are now slaves in Egypt and bring them to the land of milk and honey, to the land of Canaan, to Israel. So he selects Moses, as you know, calls Moses from a burning bush. Moses was 80 years old on the day of his calling. Moses reluctantly agreed because God made him an offer he couldn't refuse. And though he tried and tried to refuse it, God used little old, timid, hesitant Moses to lead the Israelites out of bondage. You know that God caused all of the plagues to afflict Egypt, to demonstrate to the Egyptians, but more importantly to the Israelites, that he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he is powerful, and he caused the Egyptians finally to have a change of heart. They released God's people into the wilderness. God led them across the Red Sea, and as they have continued in the wilderness, being led by God, a cloud by day and a pillar of fire at night, they came to Mount Horeb. They came to the mountain of God, where Moses has now spent 40 days and 40 nights up on the mountain receiving the 10 Commandments. And you also know in previous weeks that while he was up there, the Israelites lost their patience and their boundaries, and they were very bad. And so they made another god. They created a god out of the gold that they were wearing, and turned into a calf, or Aaron fashioned it into a calf. And so they all started worshiping and partying like they were at a college frat party. And 3 million people having a big party is what was happening. God judged them. Many of them died that very night. Moses came down, threw the tablets that God had just used to write the Ten Commandments, threw the tablets and destroyed the tablets as Moses threw it at them. And I don't know how far an 80-year-old man can throw stone tablets, but it did destroy the tablets, and God judged the Israelites that night. So there's this cleansing and this repentance that takes place. Moses is, I believe tonight, getting the second set number 2. Interestingly, God does go ahead and inscribe the Ten Commandments with his own finger again. But he makes Moses chisel out the tablets. I don't know if you know that. I'd forgotten that or didn't know that. But Moses actually made the tablets, and God did the inscribing of the Ten Commandments on those tablets. And so this is the big moment. Moses is, at the end of chapter 34, we're going to get to tonight, going to come down from the mountain with that second set of tablets, and God is now transitioning his people. They are headed straight to the promised land. Now, next week, we're going to look at the design of the tabernacle. There's no tabernacle. There's just a tent that is being used, that Moses uses to go. It's just a tent. It's just a big tent. Moses had decided to use, or God maybe instructed him to use this just regular old tent to meet with him, a meeting place for Moses, and that's been serving, and he's going to do that again tonight. But then next week we're going to look at the design and the creation of the tabernacle. Very important as they begin to make their way toward the promised land. So let's look tonight in chapter 33, beginning in verse 1. We'll read a little bit and then we'll talk about it. The commentary for tonight is out of the Bible Exposition Commentary, very fine commentary. Verse 1, Then the Lord said to Moses, Leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go up to the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivitites, and Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey. But I will not go with you because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way. Now, he says a couple of interesting things here. He basically is giving him a little history lesson. I'm getting hot. Giving him a little history lesson and reminding him, I made a promise, and this is me keeping my promise. You guys need to head to the promised land because I made that promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I'm going to keep my promise. So God says, I'm going to bless you regardless. I'm going to bless you. Now, God's not very happy with them still because of their behavior, but he says, I'm going to bless you anyway. You are destined to go to the promised land because of my promise to them. And then he says one thing at the end. Oh, by the way, there is a promise to them. He says, I will send an angel ahead of you. And this angel is going to drive out all of these people. The Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivitites, and Jebusites. God says, my angel is going to take care of it. That's awesome. That's awesome. They don't have to have any battle strategy. They don't need to have any commander and troops and armor. They don't have to make a bunch of weapons. God's going to send his angel to just take care of it. That's a good plan. They messed that up, of course, but it's a good plan. So God reminds them of his past promise. He then gives them a promise that he's going to send the angel ahead, but he gives this footnote at the end. He said, oh, by the way, one little thing. I'm not going with you. I'm so mad. I didn't use that word mad, but obviously he is mad. He says, you are a stiff-necked people. Sounds like America. You are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way. Now, you and I know that God does not have an impulse control problem. If he did, we'd all be dead. In fact, mankind would have become extinct many, many, many times, not just when Noah was around. But God doesn't. He is compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in love, and his character is not to destroy us. That may be our tendency if we were God, but it is not his tendency because he's more patient and more compassionate than we are. However, even God has his limits, and he knows it. He says, I'm so put out with you guys. I'm so disappointed. Frankly, honestly, if I go with you, you're probably not going to make it. I'm just going to get mad at some point on the way. You're going to do something stupid, say something stupid. Now, I'm paraphrasing here. You're going to say something or do something so stupid that I'm just going to zap you and you're going to be gone. So the only way you're probably going to make it is if you just go on your own. I'll meet you there, kind of thing. So he says, you go up there, but I will not go with you. Now, this is a problem. Why is it a problem? Yeah, they don't have GPS, first of all. They're in the middle of nowhere. But secondly, and by the way, it's not like they've made this trail many times. All they know is Egypt. All they know is slavery. They don't know how to be free, and they don't know how to go anywhere. But more importantly than that, without God protecting them, what's going to happen? Yeah, they're not going to last very long. They're sheep, just like you and I. In America, if God has withdrawn his hand, we can talk about anything we want to talk. We can pass all the laws that we want to pass. We can put whoever in the White House, do all that legislation, and all of this is just pointless maneuvering. If God has withdrawn his hand from our country, or if he ever does, we're doomed. We will not make it on our own. And the Israelites were the same. Now, the Israelites were stupid, but they weren't so stupid that they didn't realize it, because they do realize it very quickly. Look at verse 4. This is the NIV translation. Your translation may say it a little differently, but it says it's the same idea. When the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on any ornaments. For the Lord had said to Moses, tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I were to go with you even for a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments, and I will decide what to do with you. So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb. Now what's with the ornaments? Who cares about ornaments? Why is that important? It says they didn't put any ornaments on when they heard the news. And so the ones that have them, they stripped off their ornaments there at Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb. So what's with the ornaments? What do you wear ornaments for, even in the 21st century? You wear ornaments to the party. You're going to party. I'm not a partier. I assume you wear jewelry to the party. You dress up. It's a special night. You're putting all your goodies on. No, you need to take that off. The party's over. But there's a second reason, and it's obvious. The last time ornaments were involved, their gold jewelry and all of the earrings and all of that, they had taken it and made a calf out of it, a false god out of it. Now, apparently not all of them used all of their jewelry because they still have some. And so they took that off, I guess to avoid the temptation of doing something stupid again. So the Israelites in verse 6 stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb. And so it says they began to mourn and no one put on any ornaments. So at least they're sad. That's a good sign. When people who are called God's people proceed in the midst of their sinfulness and their unworthiness in an attitude that they deserve it, or that they're worthy, or they're in denial, or they don't even care that God is going to go his own direction. That's the end. The fact that they realize they're in trouble here. Because I don't know that God has ever said this before. You go on. You're going to have to go. In fact, he says, if I stay with you even for a moment, They won't even get out of camp before God strikes them down. They're that close right now. And I'm wondering right now in 21st century United States, God's up there going, I'm about here. I don't know that, but that's where I would be. Makes me wonder. This is what this commentary says. When Moses gave Israel this message, they responded by taking off their ornaments and mourning. Whether this was true repentance or not, only the Lord knew, which is a good point. It might have just been all lip service there. Previously, they had contributed their gold ornaments to the making of an idol, and this had been their undoing. Perhaps they were starting to learn their lesson the hard way. So look at verse 7. Now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances of their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, they all stood and worshiped, each at the entrance to his tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks with his friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. Now, this is quite a scene. We hear about this tent. It's just a tent. The tent's not important. It's just a tent. But it is a tent that he specifically used for meeting with God. He didn't put the tent in the center of the camp. He put it outside the camp. There needed to be some separation because God is holy and his people were a big mess. And so outside the camp, he had the tent. Now it says whenever they needed to inquire of the Lord, they went to the tent. But Moses also went to the tent. And what's interesting is there's a difference of when Moses went to the tent and when everybody else went to the tent, because when Moses went to the tent, something happened. God came down in the form of that cloud and enveloped the entrance to that tent. So you don't need to be a theologian among the Hebrews to realize something's going on whenever Moses goes to the tent. There goes God. God's at the meeting of the tent. And so when they see, this is 3 million people, 2 to 3 million people, they see Moses heading to the tent, because there's no Facebook, there's no telephone, there's no cell phones. They're a community, and everybody gets wind of the fact that Moses is heading to the tent, and that was a big event because they knew God was going to show up because Moses was going to the tent. So they all went to the entrance of their tent and stood because they want to watch God show up. And so Moses would go to the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down, envelop the entrance of the tent, and they knew that Moses was in there talking with God. Isn't that remarkable? That's just remarkable. Now, and I often use my mother as an example. I told you that my mother is the most godly person I've ever known. If mother prayed, I knew it was significant. I knew in confidence that her prayer was being heard. Her faith was pure enough, that it's sincere enough that I knew that God was hearing her prayer. If I really had a great need, I'd call my friend Mark Moses. I had him come here a couple of months ago or 6 weeks ago, and he preached. I told you, as you know, he's in stage 4 cancer. But Mark is a godly man. I mean, he's just an outright godly man. And I know when Mark prays, he meets with his God. I don't need to see a cloud to know that Mark or my mother are people who meet with their God. It's not just a long-distance thing. It's not just a wishful thinking thing. It's not just a ritualistic thing or a habit. It's a meeting with their God. And for you and I, we ought to be the people. Our goal should be the kind of people that when we go to meet with God, or if we kneel and are praying to God, people are thinking, God's showing up here because so-and-so is praying. And so that's what happened. So they're watching. Now, I love verse 11, one of the most famous verses in the Bible. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks with what? His friend. now let me be very clear. It's not saying that God and Moses were buddies. I have to be very careful, and I'm a little concerned sometimes if we take God down to this level that he's just the guy next door. God isn't the guy next door. He'll never be confused with your neighbor or your buddy. He's not your drinking buddy or any other kind of buddy. But what it is saying is that there was actually a relationship. They didn't use that word, relationship. That's a big 20th century, 21st century word. We're big on relationships, you know. But that's what he's describing here. That instead of just praying at God, like the Israelites did, hoping maybe he heard it, maybe he didn't, there was a difference in the connection that Moses had with God and how God had with Moses. And they noticed there is a connection there. They seem to be talking to each other. Like two people talk to each other. There is communication taking place in that tent. They know Moses isn't in there sleeping. You know, he's not in there reading a book or, well, I don't know, whatever they did in the middle of nowhere 3,000 years ago. But they know what Moses is doing in that tent. He's having a conversation with God, and God's having a conversation with Moses. That's extraordinary. And that is the level of what God calls you and I to have because of the grace of God through Jesus Christ and through the Holy Spirit. We can converse with God in much the same way. He's not our buddy. He's still our God. But God desires a relationship with his people. Connection. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks with his friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. Verse 12, Moses said to the Lord, "You've been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You've said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you're pleased with me, teach me your ways so that I may know you and continue to find favor with you." Remember, this is audacious. In fact, this is not the only audacious thing that Moses is going to say. He says, this is Moses speaking, to God, remember that this nation is your people. And now he says, Lord, maybe you forgot, just in case, I want to put this on the table. This nation is your people. Now, of course, God remembers quite well who his people are. But here's what Moses is doing. He's trying to reconnect with God or stay connected with God, and in the middle of that relationship with God, Moses is trying to take the Israelites who are unworthy and pull them into that relationship. He's trying to connect them. And in the midst of his closeness to God, he's asking God for God's favor. And ultimately, what the goal is, Moses wants God to go with them. He knows it's not going to work unless he goes with them. And so this is the conversation that's taking place. So he says, remember that this nation is your people. Verse 14, the Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Then Moses said to him, if your presence does not go up with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you're pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? By the way, one thing I didn't mention to you that we read was God does plan to send an angel. Remember, he's going to send the angel ahead, and the angel is going to defeat all these nations, all these peoples, so that the Israelites can inherit the land. So there is a representative of God. There's an angel of God, somebody from heaven, an angelic being is going to be there, but it's not enough. Moses knows that's not enough. And even the Israelites, and I give them credit for this, they don't have this conversation at least. They don't hear that God's planning to send an angel, even though he's not going to be there personally, he's going to send an angel, that many of them don't think, well, that's good enough for me. An angel, that's not half bad. That's better than nothing, so we'll go with the angel. They don't do that. They're grieved that all they're going to get is an angel because they're accustomed to God being present. An angel is a poor substitute for Almighty God. So verse 17, so Moses asked the question, what's going to separate us from anybody else if you're not with us? That's what makes us us. That's what makes the Israelites the Israelites. God is with them. Verse 17, and the Lord said to Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked because I am pleased with you and I know you by name. So this brings up this huge theological debate. Can we negotiate with God? That's the debate. So I'm going to read the commentary to you. This is a Bible exposition commentary. It says, do God's children have the right to negotiate with God as Moses did? It all depends on your relationship with God. This is their theological opinion. Moses knew the ways of God, and he was the intimate friend of God, and therefore he was able to present his case with faith and skill. And then he gives an illustration, this writer. He says, the godly Scottish minister Samuel Rutherford, who knew what it was to suffer for Christ, once wrote this. It is faith's work to claim and challenge loving kindness out of all the roughest strokes of God. That's what Moses was doing for the people. God is in a rough relationship with these people because they're stiff-necked and they're sinful. And Moses is trying to soften that rough connection. And God doesn't change. God's not just shooting from the hip here, as we would say in old Texas. He's not just winging it. God's transcendent. When you're transcendent, you can go back and forth in time, and you're all-knowing and you're all-powerful. There's no wing in it. God already knows every thought that everybody is ever going to have, in not only in the past or the present, but also the future. He knows what they're going to do and everything they're going to do and when they're going to do it. He knows the numbers of hairs on their head, God says, or the Bible says. And so God is not really in a position here to where he thinks, that's a good point, Moses. I hadn't really thought about that before. Thank you so much for reminding me. I know I said I was going to do this, but now that you make a good point, so you persuaded me. There's no persuading God. Again, God's all powerful and transcendent. He's omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. And so there's no persuading. God is creating this scenario, I think, because he wants Moses to fight for the people. God knows that the time is going to come, as it did in the past, the time is going to come again where Moses is going to want to throw his staff down and say, I quit. Take this job and, I don't want it anymore. He's going to think that. In fact, he doesn't throw his staff down. He slams it against a rock. And so God is trying to get Moses to defend the people, to be merciful to the people, because that's a characteristic that Moses is going to need. Well, I'm committed, so I better stick with it. So God is actually doing the positioning here, not Moses. I assume you get that and you understand that. Now, it doesn't mean we can't negotiate with God, but it does mean that God knows every little thought in our feeble little heads. And we're not going to say anything ever to God, and God's going to go, oh, yeah, that's right. Thanks, I forgot. Verse 18, then Moses said, and again, this is gutsy. This is really gutsy. Then Moses said, now show me what? Your glory. Now, we're in a conversation about stiff-necked people and going ahead, going with them and staying with them, and this connectedness. This almost seems to be completely out of left field. What What does he need to see God's glory for? Whatever even that means. Now, show me your glory. Let's see what you got. I can't really explain that. I know I've preached on this passage in the last year or so just because it's such a fascinating statement to me. Now, show me your glory. And God could have rightly said to Moses, well, you know, I am surrounding you right now in a cloud. That's enough. You've been in my presence for the last 40 days and 40 nights on the mountain. That's enough. You've seen more of me than anybody has ever seen. You know me by name. That's enough. But God doesn't do that, amazingly. So, and he doesn't chastise Moses for wanting to see the glory of God. Now, Moses doesn't say to God, I want to see what you look like. That's not really quite what he's saying here. What Moses says is, now show me your glory. Any thoughts? I mean, he's already having a conversation with God. What more does he want? So obviously what he wants is a step past what he has now. And what he has now is better than anybody's ever had it since before the fall. Adam and Eve conversed with God once before sin in this way. And now Moses is getting to converse with God, but he wants to take the next step. What is that step? What is it that he wants? Now we're speculating a little bit here, but what is he desiring to do? What's the goal for Moses? Is it just curiosity? I tell you what, hold that thought. I know you all had your hands up. It's a fair question, is it not? It makes you wonder. We're going to read the rest of the passage, and maybe it'll become a little more apparent as we read, and then we'll talk about it. How about that? So that was verse 18. Just one little verse, but what a powerful verse. Then Moses said, now show me your glory. Verse 19. And the Lord said, I will cause all of my, what? Goodness. I love that. I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you. Now, just a word. For you and for me, and I have learned this about humanity, even the best of people, my own mother, we all have a good side, and then we have the other side. Now, for some of us, like my mom, the good side so dominates the other side, it's hard to see. But your spouse, they know, they've seen it, and you see it in your spouse because you spend all that time with each other. If you've spent much time with your children, you know you've seen both sides. Those who are closest to you in your life, you know they have two sides to them, and you know you have two sides as well. You have the good side and the other side. God doesn't have that duality. He only has one side. And so when God says, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and Moses doesn't go, oh good, I get the good side. I'm glad I'm going to see the goodness of God because I don't want to see the other part. There is no other part. God is only good. And so God says, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you. Again, I don't even know what that means, but it's amazing. I've got to be thinking, Moses thinking, maybe I overshot. I don't know what is going to happen. I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. And then God adds this. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live. Now, why does he say that? Again, this may be an unfair question, but I am a preacher, it's what we do. Why would he say you can't see my face? Okay, I mean, the reality, that's a fair observation. The reality is The sun is what gives us light. The physical sun in our solar system gives us light, but you wouldn't want to hop on a ship and fly to the sun. You'll die immediately. You know, you can't get that close. And so there are some things you can't get too close to. And God is a being that is so powerful. And by the way, for you, for me, my mom, and anybody else, what we think of God in our most glorious moment in our life, as our little brains try to encompass the goodness of God, we are getting only the tiniest fraction of the reality of what God is. God is so far beyond our comprehension. Any being capable of creating the entire universe we can't even conceive of the galaxy and the amount of planets in the galaxy, let alone the universe, let alone the one who created it. God is God. Now, so in our brains, is the best we can do. We squeeze him down to this being that we can wrap our heads around a little bit, kind of grasp. And some of us are able to grasp God more than others, but God is unfathomable. He is immeasurable. And so the truth is, in the presence of God as mortals, it is beyond our ability. And that very well may be true. We might just unravel from an atomic level being in the presence of God. And so he says to Moses, he doesn't say, look, if you see my face, you'll go blind. You won't even survive this event, which is awesome to me. Whatever that means, God is too awesome for Moses or anybody else to even survive being in his presence. But God, at the same time, doesn't say, Moses, I know you mean well, that's a bad idea. How about I take 10 years off of your life? How about that? When Moses asks to see God's glory, God does go ahead and respond to him in an affirmative manner. He says, I tell you what, I'll give you partly. I will come near you. And he says, verse 21, then the Lord said, there is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I pass by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. Now, you also have to filter this conversation. Now, Moses understood this, and I think you understand this as well, but I have to be clear here. God is a non-corporeal being. He doesn't have a face. He doesn't have hands. He doesn't have a back. He is non-corporeal. He's not like Jesus that actually does have a face and hands and a back. God is beyond physical form. And so when God says this, he's humanizing the terms in terms that Moses can understand. But what he's saying to Moses, and by the way, when you're omnipresent and you're all-seeing, you can't have a back either. It's not like he passes by, as God's passing by Moses, and he passes him, and Moses gets to see the back of God. God's thinking, is he looking? I hope he's looking. Here's his chance. I don't know, because my back is to him. So God sees all the time, so he knows everything. And so you have to temper what these words are using, because again, how do you describe God in his presence, in his glory? And there really aren't words for that. And so doing the best he can in a way that Moses can understand, God says, I tell you what, I'm going to pass by. I'm going to have to shelter you just so you'll survive the event. But when I pass by and I'm leaving, I'm departing, I will remove my hand and you're going to get a full dose of my glory. The most you can handle. That would be his back, what he's describing as his back. So, oh my goodness. Verse 21. So verse 21, then the Lord said, there is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. Oh my goodness. Well, he hideth me in the cleft of the rock. That's a great hymn. Maybe sing that next time, ladies. That's a good hymn. I told Cherry, and I always say this every time it's sung, my mom's favorite song was In the Garden. So every time I hear that, I think of Mom. So thank you for that. But A Cleft of the Rock is a great song too, and it comes from this very passage. And so there's a great debate. Where's the rock? So in Saudi Arabia, which is the area around Mount Horeb, they have this rock that has this big split in it. I showed it to you when I was doing a series on Exodus last year. And there is this place where a man can just squeeze in this cleft in this rock. Was it there? I don't know. I know the Saudi Arabians, there was a big article I read on it this last year that they want to open it up. This is just before COVID hit. They wanted to open it up for tourism because they have big dreams of millions of tourists coming to see that big rock. Wherever it was, the rock isn't important. It's what happened at the rock. Okay, any comments or questions about this? We're going to continue with the story in chapter 34 right now. Okay, he's in the rock. Chapter 34, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Now, I don't know if that's an accusation or just a little history lesson now he's giving Moses. But he says, by the way, you broke them. And Moses casting down those tablets, I don't recall that ever being a directive of God. That was, I told you, God's not spontaneous, but Moses apparently is. In a moment of spontaneity in his disappointment, he cast down those. So he says, which you broke. Verse 2, be ready in the morning, then come up on Mount Sinai. Present yourself to me there on top of the mountain. No one is to come with you or be seen anywhere on the mountain. Not even the flocks and herds may graze in front of the mountain. So Moses chiseled out 2 stone tablets, like the first ones, went up on the Mount Sinai early in the morning, as the Lord had commanded him. And he carried the 2 stone tablets with his hands. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord, which is exactly what he said he was going to do. Verse 6, and he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the fathers to the 3rd and 4th generation. Now, this is an amazing thing because this is God speaking. God is describing himself. He first and foremost says, I am gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in love. Not just a statement about God, it's a statement from God about his character. Why is he describing himself in this manner? Because he is going to, by the way, in the middle of this, here in chapter 34, he's going to reestablish his covenant relationship with the Israelites. And so you're going to hear some similarities in this chapter to previous chapters when God established his covenant. He feels the need to reestablish the covenant. If your spouse, if you ever had a spouse that was unfaithful to you, you can't just pretend it didn't happen. There needs to be a meeting, a discussion, and there needs to be a reestablishing of your covenant with one another. And that's what God is doing here. This is the beginning part. This chapter is that. So he says, however, there is collateral damage. There is damage that is done when you sin. And we always use the scenario that if you went out and murdered somebody, God will forgive you of that murder, but the person that was murdered is still dead. That's the consequence of our sin, and our sin has consequences. And so that's why he says what he says about punishing children and their children for the sin of the fathers. There is repercussions for sin. Verse 8, Moses bowed to the ground at once and worshiped. Oh Lord, if I found favor in your eyes, he said, then let the Lord go with us. Although this is a stiff-necked people, forgive our wickedness and our sin, and take us as your inheritance. Then the Lord said, I am making a covenant with you. Before all your people, I will do wonders never before done in any nation in all the world. That's a remarkable statement to make after the miracles of the plagues in Egypt, after the crossing of the Red Sea. He is saying this now. I'm going to do things like has never been seen before. The people you live among will see how awesome is the work that I, the Lord, will do for you. Obey what I command you today. I will drive out before you the Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Be careful not to make a treaty with those who live in the land where you're going, or they will be a snare among you. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, and cut down their Asherah poles. Do not worship any other god, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Be careful not to make a treaty with those who live in the land, for when they prostitute themselves to their gods and sacrifice to them, they will invite you, and you will eat their sacrifices. And when you choose some of their daughters as wives for your sons, and those daughters prostitute themselves to their gods, they will lead your sons to do the same. Do not make cast idols. Celebrate the feast of unleavened bread. For 7 days, eat bread made without yeast, as I have commanded you. Do this at the appointed time in the month of Abib, for in that month you came out of Egypt. The first offspring of every womb belongs to me, including all the firstborn males of your livestock, whether from herd or flock. Redeem the firstborn donkey with a lamb, but if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem all your firstborn sons. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. 6 days you shall labor, but on the seventh day you shall rest. Even during the plowing season and harvest time, you must rest. Celebrate the Feast of Weeks within the first fruits of the wheat harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering and the turn of the year. 3 times a year all your men are to appear before the sovereign Lord, the God of Israel. I will drive out nations before you and enlarge your territory, and no one will covet your land when you go up 3 times each year to appear before the Lord your God. Do not offer the blood of a sacrifice to me along with anything containing yeast, and do not let any of the sacrifice from the Passover feast remain until morning. Bring the best of the first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. Then the Lord said to Moses, write down these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. Moses was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights without eating bread or drinking water. And he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. Now you see, in this covenant, it's really a very concise retelling of the covenant that he's made before. It's much more brief. But he does touch on a number of things in this covenant to remind them of the bigger covenant that they've already made with him. The fact, this is the Bible Exposition Commentary, the fact that God renewed the covenant is evidence that he forgave his people and gave them a new beginning. But God also repeated the essential elements of the covenant, especially the laws about idolatry. When Israel moved into the promised land, it would be very easy to compromise with the enemy, first by making agreements with them, then by joining in their feasts, and finally by intermarrying with them and adopting their pagan ways. It was important from the very beginning that Israel repudiate and destroy everything associated with idols, and to realize that what adultery was to marriage, idolatry was to their covenant with the Lord. When Moses came down, verse 29, from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, So Aaron and all the leaders of the community came back to him, and he spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near him, and he gave them all the commands the Lord had given them on Mount Sinai. Now, this is a great moment. I mean, if you see your pastor glowing, it's because Chris turned up the lights too bright. But here Moses comes down from the mountain, and he's just glowing, like he's radiating the presence of God. Don't ask me how that's possible or how that happened. I don't know, but he's glowing. Apparently, again, he's not aware. Everybody else sees him and is aware. He didn't have a mirror. And they're terrified. They don't want to come near him. Well, that bothers him, so he tells them, come on over. And so they do. So here's the thing. The book of Exodus opens with Moses seeing God's glory in the burning bush. Remember that? The book of Exodus begins, really this story begins with the glory of God in the burning bush. It begins with his glory. And it closes with the glory of God descending into the camp and filling the tabernacle. The presence of the glory of God in the camp of Israel was not a luxury, it was a necessity. It identified Israel as the people of God and set them apart from the other nations, for the tabernacle was to be consecrated by the glory of God. Other nations had sacred buildings, but they were empty. The tabernacle of Israel was blessed with the presence of the glory of God. So we see how God's glory is now being literally reflected in Moses. He'd been fasting and praying in the presence of God for 80 days, and he had seen a glimpse of God's glory. Is it any wonder that he had a shining face? He didn't realize that he had absorbed some of the glory and was reflecting it in his countenance. Now that's literally what had happened. Somehow Moses had absorbed the glory of God. Because of this glory, the people were afraid to come near him, but he summoned them to come to him, and they talked as before. However, after he was finished speaking to the people, Moses did something. What did he do? Do you know? He put on a veil to cover the glory of God on his face, fading away. That's why he wore a veil. Not because he was frightened of the people, but because the glory was fading away. We find that out in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 13. The Jews saw this glory as something wonderful and exciting, but what would they say if they knew it was fading away? Who wants to follow a leader who's losing his glory? So Moses would go into the tent of meeting to talk with God. The glory would return, but then he would wear the veil so the people would not see the glory disappear. In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul made several applications of this remarkable event. If you remember that great passage, we don't have time to read it right now, but I'll tell you a little about it. First, he pointed out that the glory was the Mosaic legal system. The glory of the Mosaic legal system was fading away, but that the glory of the gospel of God's grace was getting more glorious. That is, we see the old covenant, the glory of the old covenant is fading, but after the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the glory of the new covenant is becoming brighter and brighter. This was his answer to the legalists who taught that obedience to the law plus faith in Christ was God's way of salvation. We saw that in Acts chapter 15, and that was a big problem among the Jews of the day. They were willing to accept Christ, but not Christ alone. They wanted to have two covenants, Old Covenant and New Covenant, rebranded as one big covenant together. They didn't understand that Jesus was the fulfillment of the law and the old covenant was no longer necessary. We're past out of time. Finally, he applied Moses' experience to Christians who by faith see the glory of Jesus Christ in the world and experience a spiritual transformations. That's why Christians read the Bible and meditate on it, because when the child of God looks into the Word of God and sees the Son of God, he or she is transformed by the Spirit of God into the image of God, for the glory of God. And so that's what we see in the glory of God in this passage. All right, any other comments before we look at our prayer list? Okay, our time is really short, but I do want to mention just a couple of things briefly on the list. If anybody needs a prayer list, would you raise your hand? Or hand? All right, let's take a look.